It is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you to Alpha Omega Toronto's chapter's Confronting Antisemitism webinar this evening. My name is Laura Linetsky-Fleischer, and I'm the current Alpha Omega president for the Toronto chapter. Alpha Omega is the oldest international dental organization and is composed of only dentists and dental students. It was founded in Baltimore, Maryland in 1907 by a group of dental students to fight anti-Semitism and discrimination. It is the oldest international Jewish medical organization. Today, the AO international community is comprised of more than 100 alumni and student chapters in more than 10 countries. Alpha Omega is an inclusive organization that today welcomes people from all cultural backgrounds, but our mission, vision, and values are guided by three tenets of 1, professionalism, 2, fraternalism, and 3, Judaic values. AO started in order to combat anti-Semitism and discrimination more than 100 years ago. And unfortunately, this is still a battle that we are waging today. I have had the absolute pleasure and privilege to organize this event with two of my colleagues, Carol Grusin, who was the 2017 past president of AO Toronto and head of our advocacy committee, and Max Silver, who is a current fourth-year dental student at the University of Toronto. This event was conceived of this summer in response to the worldwide meteoric rise of anti-Semitism that we were confronted with during the recent Israel-Palestinian conflict. Max felt that his peers were ill-equipped to handle the barrage of anti-Semitic rhetoric and needed to learn the history and tools needed to respond appropriately. Carol and I felt that we could all use a refresher, so that is how this event ultimately came together. I would like to thank our sponsors for tonight's event who have made it possible to bring you the world-class speakers that you will be hearing from soon. Our gold sponsor is Danielle Martin from the Martin Group at Scotia Wealth Management, and our bronze sponsor is Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies. We've been fortunate to have partnered with UJA, who has organized a Zoom portion for this evening. Carol and Max will be introducing our speakers, but just a little on each of them. Carol graduated with honors from the University of Toronto Dental School in 1980 and completed her specialty in periodontics in 1984. She was the first woman to enter this program since the mid-60s, forging the way for many other women to follow suit. She received a 25-year service award from the University of Toronto. After practicing for almost 35 years, she is now retired. Carol is a dedicated philanthropist and volunteer who has been incredibly active in many organizations. She has been the president, chair, and sat on the board of numerous dental and Jewish organizations, including a number of Jewish day schools, Alpha Omega, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, UJA, and Baycrest, just to name a few. We are very lucky to have her as a current head of our advocacy committee for Alpha Omega. Max Silver will be our moderator for this evening and is in his final year of dental school at the University of Toronto. His passion for Israel and Jewish advocacy has always been strong, and he is a past board member of AEPi, the world's largest Jewish fraternity, and is a current international student rep for Alpha Omega. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Max, who will now kick off our evening.
Thank you, Laurel, for your kind introduction. It was during the most recent Israel-Hamas war that for the first time in my life, I felt scared to be Jewish. My social media feed was filled with anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric. What was even scarier was that I lacked the knowledge and the words to know what to think or how to respond. The realization that I might not be alone is what spurred the idea for tonight's event. The goal of tonight is to set the record straight, to provide you with the truth about Israel, its conflicts, and anti-Semitism, as well as to give you the tools and words with which to face this hatred. When choosing tonight's panelists, my dear friend and fellow AEPi brother, Elan Carr, immediately came to mind. Elan was appointed by the President of the United States and the Secretary of State to the Office of the United States Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. In that capacity, he served as the senior diplomatic representative of the United States and the senior advisor to Secretary Pompeo on the subject of anti-Semitism, and directed US policy and programs aimed at combating it. During his 2 years in office, He negotiated groundbreaking agreements with foreign governments, convened the first ever US government-sponsored conference in combating online hate, drove the establishment of important new policies on anti-Zionism, anti-Israel discrimination, and campus anti-Semitism, significantly broadened the global consensus on the definition of anti-Semitism, and focused the attention of law enforcement leaders across the international jurisdictions on the importance of hate crime prosecutions. He was also voted by Congress to be given the rank of ambassador. Prior to his tenure as special envoy, Mr. Carr prosecuted violent felony crimes for more than a decade as a deputy district attorney for Los Angeles County. He prosecuted cases involving Southern California's most notorious criminal street gangs. Mr. Carr is an officer in the United States Army Reserve and has received multiple awards for his 2 decades of military service. From 2003 to 2004, he spent nearly a year on military deployment in Iraq. He helped to lead a joint anti-terrorism team in life-saving missions throughout the country, and he prosecuted terrorists who attacked US troops. He was also part of the Coalition Provisional Authority's efforts to establish an independent Iraqi judiciary and helped to train Iraqi judges on constitutional law and criminal defense. Mr. Carr was the international president of Alpha Epsilon Pi. He served on the National Council of AIPAC. He was a voting member of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and he was a board member of Operation Gratitude, a charity that supports deployed military service members. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Elan, who will give you a brief history of anti-Semitism, Israel, and its conflicts.
Well, Max, thank you. What a pleasure to be with you. And I'm so proud of you as a very old and dear friend and my AAPI brother for organizing this critical conference that couldn't come at a more urgent time. So thank you for leading, because in our world today, leadership is what we desperately need. Thank you, of course, to Alpha Omega, to UJ Federation of Toronto, to AEPI, to my co-panelists, my dear friend and another AEPI brother, Frank Luntz, and of course, Michael Levitt of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, an amazing organization that does so much for the Jewish people, and frankly, so much to combat hatred of all kinds around the world. It's a special time to be with you, and I'm honored. You know, Max, you said begin with a brief history of anti-Semitism, like the old joke, you know, brief history of the Roman Empire. You know, it's sadly a long history. They don't call it the world's oldest hatred for nothing. But let me start with this. 2 days ago, the world took a moment to commemorate the solemn and devastating occasion of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Now, those attacks were horrific. They brought the world's greatest superpower to its knees temporarily and made all of us feel unsafe. Why do I begin with this? Because the terrorist organization that attacked the United States on 9/11 defined itself through anti-Semitism. For Al-Qaeda, anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, wasn't an ancillary ideology or a footnote. It was a central core defining feature of what Al-Qaeda is. This is a very, very important principle with which to begin all of our discussions about anti-Semitism. Because what sets Jew hatred apart, after all, there are no shortage of vices and hatreds and intolerances around the world. But what sets anti-Semitism apart is its longevity, its ubiquity, and its ferocity, its destructive power. In the last century, Nazism not only murdered 6 million Jews, but left a continent in ruin. And now fast forward to today. Look at the organizations, the movements, the entities that define themselves through anti-Semitism. I mentioned Al-Qaeda, but it's also ISIS, Daesh, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hezbollah. These are organizations and movements that not only are a threat to the Jewish people, these are organizations and movements that are a threat to civilization itself, to peace and security around the world, and to humanity everywhere in the world. That's why when we fight this horrific form of hatred, the hatred of the Jewish people, anti-Semitism, we are not only protecting Jews. By the way, that would be moral reason enough to do it, to protect the most beleaguered, besieged people in history. the victims of the Holocaust, the greatest evil in history. That would be moral reason enough to do it. But when we are fighting anti-Semitism, we truly are taking up a universalist cause. Because if you want to elevate the human condition, if you want to lower the level of suffering in the world, certainly this has to be one of the first addresses. And so where is this hatred coming from? 3 years ago, as Max said, I was appointed by the President of the United States and the Secretary of State to lead America's fight against this global scourge. And I took the appointment at a time of rising anti-Semitism around the world. Why is anti-Semitism rising, and where is Jew hatred coming from? It comes from 3 sources. The ethnic supremacists of the far right. These are the haters who hate everything unlike themselves, but Jews most of all, it seems. There is the anti-Semitism of the far left that typically and usually, although not always, focuses its venom on the Jewish collective, the state of Israel. And then there's the anti-Semitism of militant Islam. Now just think about that for a minute. Far right, radical left, militant Islam. These are 3 ideological camps that one would think would hate each other more than they hate anything else on earth. One could scarcely imagine greater differences. And yet they are united by their hatred of the Jewish people, and united by something else as well, and that is the tactics they use in the modern information age to spread their hatred around the world. Whereas in the old days, a hater would have to organize rallies, sit in smoke-filled rooms, conduct meetings. Today, with the click of a mouse, a hater can drive that venomous ideology with light speed across the world, reaching potentially tens of thousands of adherents. And that's why a recent European study found that the period of time required to radicalize a person online and radicalize them to violent action, actually to undertake violent action, is a fraction of the time required through offline means. And so now we see data that this plague of online anti-Semitism, which by the way reached tsunami levels when the whole world moved online with the advent of the COVID pandemic, we saw anti-Semitism flood the world online. And what happens online doesn't stay online. What happens online moves offline. Now let me say something about hatred of the state of Israel, because Max asked that we focus on that. And it's very important to remember that throughout the history of anti-Semitism, haters of Jews always adopted current events as a lens through which they can focus attacks on Jews. In the Middle Ages, of course, it was the Black Death and poisoning the wells. Lately in the COVID pandemic, it was spreading COVID, a common baseless allegation made against Jews. But also the condition of the Jewish people. Were they ghettoized or were they assimilated? Were they integrated in society or did they live in their shtetls? And was there a Jewish collective as there is today? Those facts always governed the way anti-Semites attacked Jews, whether it was verbal attack or physical attack. Well, today the fact of the matter is there is a state of Israel. The Jewish people did return to their ancient homeland. And so one of the most common manifestations of anti-Semitism today, which we could have expected, is to focus Jew hatred against the Jewish collective, namely the Jewish state, the nation state of the Jewish people. Now, I focus on this because sadly, and I saw this as a US diplomat, when it comes to Israel hatred, there suddenly is confusion and hand-wringing. Well, it's a country. Countries are different. It's a matter of statecraft. It's a matter of foreign policy, and it's complicated. There's a lot of hand-wringing about that. Well, let me tell you, it's not complicated. Hatred of the Jewish state is hatred of the Jewish people. Hatred of Jewish peoplehood, which is what Zionism is. The idea that the Jews as a people have a right to self-determination, a right acknowledged with regard to so many other people around the world. The attack on Zionism is anti-Semitism. And in fact, when one looks at how Israel hatred is manifest today, we find the very same categories of hatred, expressions of hatred that we saw manifested in the old anti-Semitism throughout history. Let's go through it. Well, you have the same rhetoric. You know, a Jewish philosopher in Europe, Elan was called not too long ago a dirty Zionist, as though the substitution of one word might confuse us as to what is actually meant. We see the same focused, rabid fixation against the target of the hatred. And nowhere do we see this more clearly than on college campuses. Let me tell you a story. A kid at a premier university, one of the world's best, gave me the answer sheet to his math class. It was a math answer sheet, the derivative of such and such is so-and-so, the integral of so-and-so, such and such. And then it says, another day in the occupied Palestinian territories, Zionist forces murdering children. Then it goes back to math. Just like with the old anti-Semitism, the new anti-Semitism focusing on Israel is just as ferocious, just as rabid in its hatred. And you know what else is the same? Blaming the Jew for the anti-Semitic response. We saw this all throughout history. Every pogrom, every orgy of anti-Semitic hatred always blamed on something Jews did, often fictional. Baking matzah with the blood of Christian children, or poisoning wells, or this blood libel or that blood libel. Well, similarly, the hatred of the state of Israel is always justified, purportedly justified, by something Israel does, either fictional or actual. A building project here, a military operation there. But just like we would never think that anti-Semitic pogroms throughout history are really the result of something Jews did, so too should we never think that hatred of Israel is somehow the product or the result of something Israel did, something the prime minister said, or something the prime minister didn't say, or something Israel did or didn't do. Nonsense. Just like you don't blame a victim for crime, you don't blame the target of anti-Semitism for anti-Semitism. And so what do we do about it? I'll look forward to your questions, but let me just leave you with this. One of the key assets that we so desperately need in our fight against Jew hatred is for the Jewish people to stand together, for there to be no differences of opinion on our own future and on our own safety. On other things we can disagree. But when it comes to our own safety, the safety of our children, we've got to stand together. We are in the season of reckoning, of Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. And in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we reflect inward on what we want to do and how we are going to be better in the coming year. And the last parasha we read before Rosh Hashanah, Parashat Nitzavim, begins with the line, "You are standing, all of you, before the Lord your God." And that line, said to best prepare us for the new year, means that we have to understand that we will be held to account for the actions we take today. One day, it might be in 5 years or in 10, but one day, our children, our grandchildren will ask us, when Jews were attacked on the streets of New York and Los Angeles, when Jewish buildings were defaced throughout the world, when Jews in Europe, the seat of the Holocaust that ended 75 years ago, when Jews were attacked in major European cities, what did you do? What actions did you take? The spirit of the high holidays is that we resolve not to answer that question with silence. We resolve to be able to give an answer of which posterity can be proud. And so now is our time to stand together, to combat Jew hatred in every form it takes, and to fight for that better future that our children and grandchildren so richly deserve. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Elan, for everything you just shared. I hope everyone else benefited from Elan's presentation just as much as I did. When planning tonight's event, I not only wanted the panel to provide you guys, the audience, with knowledge on such important topics, but I also wanted the panelists to provide you with the tools and the words that work to combat Jew hate. And the first person that came to mind was Dr. Frank Luntz. Frank has been a mentor and a friend of mine for a large number of years now. And I'm really grateful for everything he's done for me. He's helped me with numerous communication related projects like dental school applications, personal statements, reference letters. But Frank's not just great at writing reference letters. He's one of the world's most respected communication gurus today. And he has played a crucial role in helping governments and Jewish organizations worldwide in combating anti-Semitism and finding the words and the verbiage that works to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Frank Luntz.
Great, Max. I'm trying to start my video, but my host was not letting me. There we go.
There you go.
I warn you all, it is 12:24 a.m. in the UK, where I'm speaking to you all from. This is the wonderful opportunities of Zoom and the hellishness of a global presentation. I'm only going to take a few minutes. I am going to share with you some language because I said to Max, the only way that I would do this is if I actually was able to teach. And so what I'd like to do is to show you, and you may want to take photographs of this, examples of language that would be incredibly powerful. And I don't expect you all to agree with this. In the end, you are going to be successful if you are able to reach most of the people most of the time. There will be 15 or 20% of your target audience that will not listen to your message. There will be 15 or 20% of your message that will not make it through, that will not be supported or believed or credible or influential. I accept that. But in trying to prepare for this, let me offer you 21 words and phrases to help you communicate both to sessions where there are attacks on Israel and sessions where there are attacks on anti-Semitism. First and foremost is you have to be mutual. The idea of mutual recognition, mutual respect, everyone deserves. You need to be universal. I recognize that the Palestinians will never speak with empathy, with understanding, with appreciation for the Jewish state. That's what the government does. They make things worse for their people. But I expect you to be much more open-hearted. I expect you to respect the hopes and dreams and aspirations of your neighbors. Just as you are grateful for a state that did not exist for 2,000 years, the Palestinian people have aspirations themselves that need to be respected. The idea that you're invested in peace, it's not enough to say you're committed to peace. It's not enough to say that you want peace. Invested in peace shows that you already made the effort. And that's what American and Canadian and British audiences want to hear, that you've done something to make this happen. And by the way, peace is not short-term. Peace is long-term. Peace should be forever, which is why you speak about the genuine, enduring peace, one that will outlive governments. The Israeli people have nothing against the Palestinian people. In fact, they see them as their cousins. It's the Hamas, as Elan spoke earlier. It's Hamas and Hezbollah. It's their leadership, or the leadership of the Iranian factions, that are causing all the ugliness and all the bloodshed, which is why you ask your audience to imagine what it's like and then explain how it feels to see missiles and rockets raining down over you day after day after day, coming from your neighbor. Would you insist that something be done, or would you allow this to happen where one day you're going to school, the next day that school doesn't exist? If you're watching me from a university campus, probably the most important language is diplomacy and discussion, conversation and cooperation. I teach at NYU Abu Dhabi. It's one of my most proud activities. I also teach at the IDC in Israel. I will be teaching in Saudi Arabia in the next few months. And I'm proud that I do all three places, because that's an example of cooperation and conversation, that you're willing to listen, which is why I'm very mindful of how long I go, because one of my rules of effective communication is to give people a chance to ask questions and challenge and disagree. It's very important. That's why they're your Palestinian neighbors, rather than some people, and be careful, don't attack the population when you really mean to disagree with the government. BDS, how to deal with BDS, it's a pressure group. It's a political pressure group because it seeks to use politics and economics to get its way. It's the best way to communicate that. And the fact of it being a cycle of violence and destruction, that's communicating the what has been happening year after year after year. You need to acknowledge it. If you want them to listen to you, they have to know that you hear the others, not the other side, but you hear another side. If you want them to be empathetic to you, they have to see your empathy as well. And it's a legitimate thing to challenge those who disagree with Israel, to tell them to build schools, not terror tunnels. Why has so much money that comes to the Palestinian Authority, that comes to Gaza? Why is so much money spent on armaments and terror tunnels and so little money spent on schools and hospitals? It's not surprising that their economy is bad. Their economy is based on a warlike footing. So these are the words that work. And let me just show you one more set. And by the way, I'm going to leave the best for last, which is a statement that you can use word for word to describe what's going on there. But Max, when you said you don't have the language, now I'm going to acknowledge this language is now 4 years old and some of it doesn't apply. And as I address it, I'm trying to understand and communicate the changing realities of 2021. And it's very frustrating to me that the Jewish community overall has not updated this. They don't have new language for a new situation. So let me give you an example. Number 4, particularly now, all lives matter, Palestinian lives, Israeli lives, every life matters. That phrase is now a given because we've all heard of Black Lives Matter. And it now has much broader support than it did when this was written 4 years ago. And notice I started with Palestinian lives, even before Israeli lives. I know that there will be people who are going to ask questions and are going to be angry with me that this should be about Israel. This should be about anti-Semitism. It is my mission to find understanding and cooperation and mutual respect. And we won't do it by damning each other or killing each other. We're only going to do it by seeking some sort of common ground and trying and trying and trying, which is why that line number 3, diplomacy, is always preferable to destruction. This is an opportunity for us, as bad as things are in the Middle East and as tough as things are in Canada and in the US. And by the way, and Elan will confirm this, the FBI released their examples of religious hatred over the last 12 months. And anti-Jewish hatred is more than every other religion combined. It's the highest it has ever been. And you need to talk about the facts. And this is a fact. And so use it as facts, not evidence, but facts. 2 more. Boycotting Israel will do nothing to help the Palestinians. I speak about BDS because our students on college campuses are being thrown this in classrooms, walking to class in their dorms. BDS isn't just about a political point of view. It's now becoming a way of life. And so a phrase that's similar to that is that solutions come from engagement, not silence. I found it very difficult to have these conversations with students who don't like Israel, but that makes them even more important because it's through these conversations that we'll find some sort of common ground. The Abraham Accords, we should be talking about that because those are 4 Arab nations that recognized Israel, and they're opening up economic opportunities and business opportunities and cultural opportunities. And it's a warm peace, not a cold peace. These are things that the populations on both sides want to pursue. So this is a set of statements for you to make. I've given you the words, I've given you the statements. And later on, when we do the Q&A, I'm going to give you an entire statement that you can make in helping you to present. But please do it out of love. Do it out of kindness. That in the end, if there but for the grace of God go I. Imagine if we were in Gaza, if we were on the West Bank, that there we have to find a way to find accommodation. And if we do, I do believe that it'll be good for the region. It will be good for the people who live there. It will reduce the examples of anti-Semitism, both north and south of the North American border. And it'll be good for all of us. So let's communicate out of love and understanding and respect and empathy, not out of revenge, not out of anger, and with a hope to a better future. Max?
Hi, thank you so much, Frank, for your very informative and informational presentation. Will give us a lot to think about and has given us valuable words to speak to other people about. My name is Carol Grusin, and I am going to introduce the rest of our speakers. But first, I would like to thank Laurel for her kind words about me. And I would like to thank Max for his enthusiasm, and we look forward to great things from you as a future leader. At this time, I would like to introduce Michael Levitt. Many of us will identify with Michael as a member of Parliament for York Centre. As member of Parliament from York Centre. During his tenure as an MP, Michael served as chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development, and has worked on the subcommittee on international human rights. Currently, Michael is the president and CEO of the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, a center which is devoted to Holocaust education, combating anti-Semitism, racism, and promoting freedom, democracy, and human rights for all. Michael has served on many human rights and Jewish political affairs committees. It is my pleasure to introduce Michael, who will give us an overview of the current anti-Semitic climate in North America. Welcome, Michael, and thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Carol. And if anybody knows the mandate of our organization, it's certainly you as a longtime board member of Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. So really, thank you so much for including me, Max, Laurel, to be joining such an esteemed group, Frank, Elan, and of course, Jay and Daniel, who you're going to be hearing from after me, Alpha Omega Dental Fraternity, AE Pi, and UJ Federation, all who have helped make this possible. So we've heard some tremendously insightful remarks from the two earlier speakers. What I want to try and do is contextualize it a little bit into the situation that we find ourselves in Canada, particularly over the last number of months, because I suggest to you that really things on the ground have changed. It's the work that certainly I do and Jay and Daniel do in Canada every day, and I think probably they're going to be shedding some more light on that. But this is certainly an unprecedented time. So I'm just going to activate my screen here, hopefully. I'm always a little worried that it's not. There we go. Okay, so I want to run through a short presentation, but I find it helpful to have the images because I think, really a picture says 1,000 words. Mainstreaming of Jew hatred. Over the last few months, Canadian Jews have endured assaults, anti-Semitic slurs and harassment, trespassers hanging eviction notices on the doors of Jewish homes, vandalism, including swastikas and the burning of Israeli flags, harmful misinformation across social media condemning Israel as an apartheid state, and one-sided statements from various university organizations condemning the Israeli government with no mention whatsoever of Hamas, a terror group. So I want to start off by showing you this image. This was a screenshot taken from some students at Laurier University back in the spring, who on TikTok shared photos of, they depicted a violent attack against, obviously, Jews and the state of Israel. This is a mock eviction notice that appeared on homes in Toronto and Ottawa, homes obviously that had a mezuzah on the door frame. And it basically draws a parallel between what was happening in Israel and the Middle East and bringing it right to our doors. So going to what Elan said, that hate against the Jewish state is hate against the Jewish people here or anywhere else. And I think you can get a sense of what was going on. You're also seeing here an Israeli flag burned at a rally in Vancouver. Really shocking images. The invocation of the swastika during the events that unfolded in May, but I have to tell you that have continued right up to this day during the election campaign that's being run in Canada at the moment. And you can see the first image here. This was taken at Nathan Phillips Square, or just outside of Nathan Phillips Square. The Israeli flag embossed with the swastika, the most hateful of symbols, and we can all figure out what the meaning there is. Signs at these rallies included things like "Hitler was right" and "Death to Israel." And you can see the second image was actually taken in London, Ontario. Again, more of the swastikas and the Nazi imagery. So this is even more current. These are some images taken over the last few weeks. We had a swastika drawn on Beth Shalom Synagogue, just down the road from me here in central Toronto. We had Rachel Ben-Dayan, a candidate for election in Montreal. Her and another Jewish candidate had swastikas. Anthony Housefather had swastikas drawn on their election signs. And the swastika has been appearing on election signs across the country, on multiple party signs. This has been a very ugly time for the use of Nazi imagery during this election. And you can see here the yellow star. This is something that we started seeing recently, and we're getting, at Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, we become a point where people are calling us, sending us pictures, and it's happening on a daily basis. These are not isolated incidents. The yellow sign being used by anti-vax protesters who, again, are trying to tie and draw a parallel between the Holocaust and vaccine passports, or whatever the particular angle they're taking is. But the yellow star has been a recurring theme of late, as has the swastika. This graffiti was found yesterday in Toronto. Today's Monday, on Sunday. And Jamie Kersner Roberts, our director of policy, lives around the corner and went and took these pictures late yesterday afternoon. The day after 9/11, this was found. Jews did 9/11. Jews ran the slave trade. And just yesterday, we had a situation where an NDP candidate in Toronto, actually in the riding that I sit in, was found to have shared conspiracy theory, anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories, which basically accused Israel of stealing or misappropriating American vaccines. I think Israel might be able to help you solve the mystery of the unaccounted vaccines. And they went to Israel. So our organization actually put out a statement on this yesterday, and the candidate addressed it and admitted that these were baseless accusations. But it's part of a grander problem. We've seen, and Elan mentioned this, we've seen anti-Semitic conspiracy theories trumped up on to do with COVID, and that somehow Jews are responsible. And you'll see we have some more of this. Campus incidents. I'm going to rush through this and actually move to the next slide, because with Jay and Daniel on the call, they're going to have plenty to say about campus. So I'm not going to take time to do that. Media. This has been a real hotbed of misinformation, especially during the conflict between Israel and the terror group Hamas, continuing to ignore very serious incidents of anti-Semitism taking place in Canada. So for example, the images I showed you of the rally that took place at Nathan Phillips Square, where swastikas were openly on display, as they were in Mississauga just a few days later, not a mention. Those rallies were described as peaceful events. This was a screenshot from, I guess, June 18th. I can see it right there. In response to incendiary devices, incendiary balloons that being launched from Gaza, Israel launched some airstrikes. And this is the way it was reported. Israel launches airstrikes on the Gaza Strip for a second time since ceasefire ended last month's 11-day war. No mention of what caused this defense of Israeli property and citizenry. No mention of that, one-sided. And this fuels what we're seeing in the broader society. So one of the things that we did alongside 220 other organizations was we issued 2 community statements. And I've got one of them that I'm going to show you next, because it was to do with the need for society to stand up and call out the anti-Semitism that was running rampant in Canada over the last number of months. More than 220 Jewish organizations, including AEPI and Alpha Omega Fraternity, signed on to this statement. And well, I just want to read out a couple of the points here. So we stand with the Jewish community in the face of anti-Semitism. We call on fellow Canadians to stand up to anti-Semitism in all its forms and challenge it whenever it rears its ugly head. And we listed a number of things. When Jews are demonized and targeted for supporting Israel, that's anti-Semitism. When then in the name of criticizing Israel, anti-Zionists pelt Canadian Jews with stones, that's anti-Semitism. When Jewish businesses in Canada are boycotted, that is anti-Semitism. When Jewish youth are subjected to merciless harassment and bullying online, that's anti-Semitism. And when Canadian institutions whitewash or simply ignore these facts, it too contributes to anti-Semitism. And we were so proud that 220 organizations from coast to coast to coast signed this particular statement that ran in national media. Online hate, you're all aware. You see and again, Elan mentioned it as well. You see the type of hate that breeds online, especially on social media, which has been slow to respond. We're starting to see more reaction, but they've been very slow to respond. So let me just show you a number of the images. You know, COVID-19 viewed under a microscope. If you have the bug, give a hug, spread the flu to every Jew. Show your support for Palestine. Don't stay silent. COVID 48. I mean, these are images that, and there's so many more. You know, any of you that spend time on social media, well, unfortunately, have been subjected to these. And you can see here the most vehement anti-Semite on Twitter is most definitely the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, who we have been again continuing to point out the nature of these tweets, as do many other Jewish groups around the world, for the hate and the attempts to propagate the annihilation of Israel. And you can see in the last one here, why should and how can Israel be eliminated? Ayatollah Khamenei answers to 9 key questions. I mean, this account is far and away the most hateful. And I'm very proud to actually sit on the Interparliamentary Task Force to combat online anti-Semitism, alongside members of Parliament and former members of Parliament and Congress people from the US, the UK, Israel, Australia, and New Zealand. And this is some of the work that we are doing. And just always my closing picture is my friend and mentor, Erwin Kotler. Actually, the last international meeting I had as a parliamentarian was at APAC, actually with Elan and Erwin, where we sat and talked about Elan's role as special envoy on anti-Semitism, and we're developing some ideas of how that might work in the Canadian context. And proud of Erwin every day for the work that he's doing to combat anti-Semitism and to combat also Holocaust denial, which is part of his mandate. Getting a thumbs up there from Elan, who I know has very warm feelings for Erwin too. So we have a lot of work to do in Canada. I hope this was helpful in showing you a little bit of the current context that we're facing. This is happening every day. These aren't isolated. And Elan used the term, I'm going to use it again. It's not just anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is Jew hate, and we must continue to fight it tooth and nail at every single opportunity. And certainly I know that the people on this call that you're going to be hearing from are committed to doing that. So thank you very much. Max, everybody, thank you for allowing me to present.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that excellent presentation. We have comfort knowing that FSWC is combating increasing anti-Semitism in our community every single day, in cooperation with many other Jewish organizations. At this time, we would like to welcome Jay Solomon to speak to us. For the past 15 years, Jay has worked as a volunteer and professional in the Toronto Jewish community. Currently, Jay brings his extensive background in public relations, issue management, and strategic advocacy to his role as Chief Communications Officer and Public Affairs Officer for Hillel, Ontario, the largest Hillel worldwide, representing 14,000 Jewish students across 9 universities. Please welcome Jay, who will speak about how they help Jewish students across university campuses.
Well, thank you very much, Carol, and thank you to Alpha Omega and everyone else who's participated this evening. Really a pleasure to be with all of you. As Carol mentioned, I'm Jay Solomon. I'm the Chief Communications and Public Affairs Officer for Hillel, Ontario, supporting approximately 14,000 Jewish students at 9 universities across the province. Hillel, Ontario is now the largest Hillel in the world. We work to empower students to make an enduring commitment to Jewish life, learning, and Israel. We are also at the forefront of the fight against anti-Semitism and are committed to empowering the next generation of Jewish leaders to foster pride in our identity, to combat anti-Semitism, and to protect the rights of Jewish students. These past 6 months have been very challenging for our community, and especially for those on campus. For years, the Jewish community has been the most frequently targeted religious group for hate crimes in the country. And unfortunately, this past period has been no exception. We also must acknowledge, though, that in the context of the spring's hot war in Israel, the realities of anti-Semitism hit home for Jewish students on campus like they never have before. With the recent conflict, Jewish students have experienced heightened and concerning examples of anti-Semitism. They have been threatened and bullied on social media, discriminated against by campus groups and student unions, and made to feel unwelcome on campus. They have been labeled racists, colonialists, and murderers, and they have been held collectively responsible for the decisions of our government thousands of kilometers away. There has never been a more important time for Hillel to support Jewish students on campus and to stand up against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism wherever and whenever it rears its ugly head. And make no mistake, Hillel of today is not Hillel of the past. And advocacy is not one function or one element of our mandate. Rather, it's core to everything that we do. And it's never been more important and more critical than it is today. So what are we doing? As an organization, we embed and train dedicated advocacy professionals with enhanced skills and training in each of our campus teams across the province. We train and empower Jewish students and non-Jewish students, become strategic advocates and effective leaders. We educate the wider campus community about Israel, about Zionism, and both historical and modern anti-Semitism. We build strategic alliances with non-Jewish leaders across campuses based on shared values and intersections, and leverage those relationships to advance our community's common goals. And we cultivate and empower moderate students to run and win campus elections. In the context of the presentations that you've all already heard, I will keep my remarks very brief and we'll stop in a moment, and I look forward to taking your questions. I'll close by saying Hillel, Ontario is the only Jewish campus group with full-time professionals on campuses across the province, supporting Jewish students in their fight against anti-Semitism. We have so much work that we have to do, but I'm tremendously optimistic about all we can accomplish when we work together. Carol, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Jay, for speaking to us today and leading Hillel in its mandate. We are also very fortunate to have Daniel Koren speak tonight. Daniel is the Executive Director of Hasbara Fellowships Canada. Daniel has worked previously with many organizations, including UJA Federation of Greater Toronto, the Canadian Jewish News, and B'nai B'rith Canada. In his role as Director of Hasbara Canada, Daniel's goal is to empower and train students so that they have the confidence and tools necessary to educate their fellow students about Judaism, Zionism, and Israel from a balanced perspective. It is my pleasure to welcome Daniel, who will explain what Hasbara is all about. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Carol, and thank you, Alpha Omega. Oops, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Carol, so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Alpha Omega Toronto and UJ Federation. I am honored to be on such an esteemed panel and to be with all of you here tonight. As mentioned, my name is Daniel Koren. I'm the Director of Hasbara Fellowships Canada. Our mandate here at Hasbara is to train and to empower student leaders to be advocates for Israel and to combat anti-Semitism on campus, on high school, college, and university campuses from across Canada. The biggest thing that we try to do at Hasbara is to give students confidence. Why? Because it's very easy to look at your feet and not respond when you're seeing student groups promulgate anti-Semitic rhetoric, when you hear professors constantly saying that Jews aren't indigenous. It's very easy not to respond to those issues, to those concerns. And what we try to do, and what we do, I think, very effectively, is train students to have that confidence and to understand what are we talking about here. And one of the best ways I think we're able to do that is to bring students to Israel and to the Palestinian territories, in fact, for them to meet Israelis and Palestinians alike, to be able to meet Israelis who are pro-BDS, Israelis who are anti-BDS, and Palestinians. And the majority of Palestinians that they meet actually explain to them why BDS is detrimental to them, and it prohibits them from putting food on the table, which really is what all of us want to do in the end. So there's a lot that they're able to take from this experience, bring it back to campus, and educate those around them. Now, we abide a strict philosophy in terms of engaging the 70%. What does this mean? We tell students who are coming back to campus, don't look for the other people who are pro-Israel and tell them how great Israel is, and don't look for the people who are anti-Israel and tell them how great Israel is, because you're not really going to change anyone's mind. So we tell them to engage the 70% and try to educate people who are apathetic, misinformed, uninformed, don't know much about the Arab-Israeli conflict, don't know much about Judaism. I believe Dr. Luntz had said it very well, that the language of universities is very much about diplomacy and understanding. It's about cooperation and conversation. This is the language we need to speak on campus, and these are the tools that we give to our students. We're not trying to create arguments. We're not coming into this from a negative perspective. As Zionists, we are pro-Israel and we are pro-Palestine. We are pro-peace and prosperity for two peoples. And this is truly the message that we want to bestow to our students. You've heard a lot about this today, especially about what's going on campus. In my view, there is an outright assault on Jewish identity on campus. There is an attempt to rewrite Jewish history and the Jewish experience, which is why, in my view, we have the unique responsibility as Jews to stand up and to share our narrative. And this is something we're able to do thanks to social media. You know, I can't tell you how many universities where I saw hateful rhetoric and propagandas and even outright petitions that called for Zionism to be banned, right? This is antithetical to academic freedom, antithetical to what you would expect on campus. And we are seeing it at universities from across the country. You know, I could speak to so many unfortunate incidents of students bullying other students during the most recent conflict. We saw students making TikTok videos about other students for having the gall of posting an Israeli flag. So much misinformation and vitriol that you know, it's hard to respond to it. But really, we look at what we have to do, not from a sense of we're going to change, you know, the anti-Israel mentality in academia. Because to be completely honest with you, I don't believe we're going to be able to do that. The anti-Israel mentality is very much ingrained in certain facets of academia. And there's certain professors who are very anti-Israel who continue to ensure that other anti-Israel professors follow suit. But what we can do, and what we are able to do, is to affect change at a grassroots level. We're able to explain to our students, to our fellows, why Jews are an indigenous people. We're able to explain why the conflict that we're seeing is not a matter of Israelis versus Palestinians. It's a matter of extremists versus moderates. And one of the greatest things I think we're able to do is explain that we cannot look at this through a Western lens. And that is what the BDS groups and the anti-Israel groups have done very well, that they've tried to depict what's going on in America and in North America as exactly the same as what's happening in Israel. And it is not a black versus white issue, and it is not an Israeli versus Palestinian issue. In fact, the majority of Zionists and Israelis you meet today will tell you absolutely that they simply want to get along in peace and prosperity with their Palestinian neighbors, with their Palestinian cousins. Everything that I believe we need to be able to do on campus and on social media is educate, because I still look at information and as education as the best offense. And we need to educate, especially in Canada, that the vast majority of Canadian Jews, including Canadian Jewish students, identify as Zionists. This is the normative form of identification for Canadian Jews. There are studies, there is data to show this. And we need to explain that Zionism does not negate the experience of Palestinians or Arabs. The level of propaganda and misinformation we have seen on university campuses recently has been staggering. We've seen student groups inviting PFLP terrorists to speak. We've seen student groups fundraising for PFLP and calling for Palestinian terrorists to be removed from Israeli prisons. And we need to explain to this 70% that the PFLP, just because it has Palestine in its name, does not mean that it speaks on behalf of the millions of Palestinians who do not want to see death and destruction, but want to simply put food on the table, who want to simply live normal lives. And this is something that is not construed when we're not speaking up. On social media, especially, we have the unique opportunity to be able to speak up and to engage individuals. And what I want all of you to take from this is, don't comment on people's walls. When you see everyone else is promoting anti-Israel rhetoric, it might not be the most helpful way for you to make your point across. One of the best things that we've seen, and I can share so many fantastic stories from where our fellows have been active, is engaging individuals, speaking to them, directly messaging them, explaining to them, did you realize this from the river to the sea call is actually a call for Israel's destruction? Because I can tell you, there were many students that I know that removed their posts when they learned about what this is really about. And we have to understand, not every single person that's saying free Palestine or even saying something critical of Israel is not necessarily is that person anti-Semitic. And a lot of the times people are ignorant and oblivious to what they're saying. And that's why we need to be vigilant on campus, on social media. We need to engage people. We need to have conversations with people. And we have to understand that this is not a black and white issue. There are nuances here. And having conversations is truly the best way to go. So I think there's so much that we've all learned, from phenomenal co-panelists today. And I look forward to taking any questions you might have. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Dan. We're now going to move into an awesome part of the evening. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us. I'm going to now ask the panelists to turn on their cameras. And we're going to move to the question and answer period. So a lot of these questions were submitted by you, the audience, when you registered. And you actually have the ability to submit questions right now via the Q&A function. These esteemed panelists are here to answer them, and let's get right into it. So one of the first ones we've got, I love Israel, but cannot defend the settlements. So how do Jews declare a distinction that protects our respect for Israel while not necessarily agreeing with their policies? This is the message that Jews in North America need to know how to navigate. So we're not sidetracked into defending Israeli policies, instead of validating why Israel has a right to exist. So I will turn the mic over to Elan right here. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say that Dan ended on a very, very important point. and that is you have to know your audience. Not every person, but certainly on campus, not every of your fellow student who takes a position that sounds anti-Israel is anti-Semitic. Look, if you're uninformed and the bad guys, and there are real bad guys, the bad guys are telling you, Israel commits genocide. Israel is an apartheid regime. Israel is appropriating land away from people who have a right to it. You think, well, gee, I'm against genocide. I'm against apartheid. Israel must be bad, and one might adopt anti-Israel positions. So I say that because in every interaction you might have, you have to begin with, is this basically a good person who is misinformed? Or is this one of the bad guys who is propagating vicious blood libels against the state of Israel? Because you would deal with them completely differently. Now, with regard to settlements, this is a key point here, because if you're talking to a bad guy and you say, well, I'm not really pro-settlement myself, that's it, you've lost, because that person is gonna use your admission against you. And so here's how I would handle this. Half of our people think that settlements are, part of the Zionist mission of settling the land of Israel. It's how Israel was built. The other half think that settlements are wrong and illegal. I would say this, and I've said this to large groups, including on the left. Listen, we can disagree on settlements, and there are all kinds of views about settlements. But there's one thing that you cannot argue, and that is settlements are not an obstacle to peace. In fact, settlements are demonstrably have nothing to do with any peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. And that's demonstrable because, one, the biggest breakthrough between Israel and the Arabs, the Madrid peace talks, occurred during the most aggressive pro-settlement government Israel has ever had. Two, the Palestinians were repeatedly offered territory, 97% of Judea and Samaria settlement-free, and 100% of Gaza settlement-free, and they turned it down. So clearly something else is going on there. Three, there were settlements in the Sinai, big, enormous cities. These were cities. It wasn't an obstacle to peace between Israel and Egypt. In fact, those settlements were evacuated, and Israel and Egypt now have a peace that is decades old. And lastly, and perhaps most damningly on this point, is that when Israel could not, because of Palestinian intransigence, sign a peace deal with the Palestinians in Gaza, Ariel Sharon said, you know what? We're gonna unilaterally withdraw. You won't sign a peace deal with us. We're gonna give you the land anyway, without a peace deal. And so what did Israel do? Israel withdrew from 100% of the Gaza Strip. There were settlements all over that area. They pulled Jews. These are IDF and police pulled Jews out of synagogues and out of their homes for the sake of trying to get peace between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. And they turned over 100% of Gaza, settlement-free, Jew-free, Judenrein, to the Palestinians. What happened since then? Tens of thousands of rockets launched into Israeli towns, fired into schools, and I visited Sderot. It is unbelievable what these kids have to endure. So you can say settlements, clearly, settlements have nothing to do with the peace process. And so I wouldn't start to walk down that road and say, well, maybe you're right, maybe settlements are a bad thing, because we won't agree whether settlements are a good thing and a bad thing. So, but you should absolutely, and all of us should absolutely defend the point that settlements are not an obstacle to peace, never were an obstacle to peace. The number one obstacle to peace is terrorism. That's the obstacle to peace.
Thank you, Elan. Michael, you want to add something there? Oh, you have to unmute yourself there.
Sorry, just one brief point, and that is, on this one, I'd also pivot to the double standard. And the double standard that's applied, there is territorial disputes happening all over the world. There's territorial disputes in Morocco, there's territorial disputes between China and Taiwan, there's territorial disputes between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and on and on and on. And yet, in none of those situations is there, again, this delegitimization of a country the way that Israel is delegitimized by those looking to exploit the nature of this territorial dispute. So I absolutely agree with what Elan said, but again, I really do. I come back to this double standard that is all the way throughout the narratives of those looking to basically throw shade on the state of Israel.
Amazing. Thank you both. Okay, so we'll move on. So next question. How can we effectively argue against the narrative that Jewish people colonized the region of Palestine? And this is kind of an extension of the previous question.
I mean, I think any of us and all of us could answer that one. I mean, you know, the Jewish people are an ethnicity. We aren't just a religion. You know, if you do 23andMe or my DNA, as many people in this audience have, you know, you'll never get a result that says, you know, you're 20% Catholic or 50% Baptist or 70% Muslim. But you will get a result that says you're 100% or 80% or 50% Jewish. And that's because we are an ethno-national group and we come from a certain place. That place is Israel. That's where we come from. That's where all of us originally come from when we go back enough generations. And in fact, not only are we not colonizers, but colonizers kicked us out of that place. Once, and then we came back. Twice, then we came back. And we keep returning to our land, our ancient homeland. And so if you want to take an anti-colonial position, you should be anti-Roman and anti-Babylonian, because those are the people that came in and forcibly removed us from our homes. And we came back to our homes. We held on to that dream of returning to our homes in the state of Israel. And we have done that. And the Jews have in returning to that land have built a shining example for humanity of democracy and freedom and tolerance and world-changing innovation. And as opposed to that, the people who want to remove the Jews yet again from that land are all about death and destruction and terrorism. And so Israel truly is the cause of the just. And that's really what we have to stress always.
Thank you, Elan.
If I could also add, I would just also strongly say that to effectively argue against the narrative is also to be able to explain why Jews are an indigenous people. And if we're able to explain why Jews are an indigenous people, most people, again, going back to the 70%, don't know. They've never read the Torah. They've never seen that Jerusalem's mentioned hundreds of times in the Tanakh. They don't understand that this is a land-based relationship that we have to this land, that every single thing in our religion, and we very much are a nation, and I appreciate, Elan, you saying that, you know, comes back to this land, right? And the more we're able to explain that Jews are actually an indigenous people, you could look at the UN's own criteria developed by Jose Martinez Cobo. The Jewish people meet every single criteria that is required to be an indigenous people. And that's something, again, that we've only started having this conversation recently, and it needs to come out of our community into the wider community as well.
Okay, thank you very much to you both. We're going to move to a communication related question for Frank here. Zionism has very much become a four-letter word. What has Zionism come to mean in society, and what can we do about it?
By the way, one of the challenges that we have in all of this is look at the screen right now. We're 6 middle-aged white guys. Okay, 5 of us, and there's you, Max. This is not helpful. And I'm right of center. I do not believe in categorizing people, but I know that so many people who are trying to reach do. And it is a fact that younger women are more effective than younger men. That if you want to reach those who are on the left or progressive side of politics, you're going to do better with women than you will with men. We have to find some way to avoid that. Now, in terms of Zionism, and this is going to upset everybody, the effort that was made to equate Zionism with racism was effective. And if you put a Zionist t-shirt on a kid in most universities in Canada and in many universities in America, you're putting that child in jeopardy. That word itself, and this is one of the reasons why it's been very hard for me to continue this effort, that there are too many Jews, leading Jewish activists who follow their own point of view rather than trying to reach out to others who are self-driven and motivated rather than the community overall. Zionism, to too many young people, is now extremism, and it actually leads to a rejection of what you have to say, of what you think, and eventually being canceled. And so we've been saying now for the last 4 years, and I've had so many, and I acknowledge this, that there are a number of groups that are hostile to this conclusion. But our data shows that the difference between Israel, the Jewish state, the people of Israel, any way you want to describe Israel, is more favorable than describing it as the Zionist state or that you support the word Zionism. And so we've been strongly advocating, if you don't want to get your students hurt, that it is far better to drop the term and wait for a time when you can try to recover it than it is to fight over it now. We have so much crap. Anti-Semitism, as our panelists have spoken of, both in Canada and the US, don't add to it the pressure of fighting for Zionism, because in reality, the fight is for Israel and it is against anti-Semitism. And fighting for Zionism is a distant, distant third. Max, I'm glad you asked that question.
Can I jump in? I actually very much agree with what Frank is saying in terms of how toxic the term Zionism has become. The question is, what do you do about it? Do you abandon it? And can you abandon it? I mean, you know, Zionism, Zion is Jerusalem. And it's, you know, can you divorce the Jewish people from that term? You know, I'll tell you a story from my experience. I signed a deal with Bahrain, with the King Hamad Center of Bahrain. And we negotiated this deal. And language that we settled upon and that Bahrain signed, this is, by the way, the first time an Arab entity has signed a deal with the United States to combat anti-Semitism, including in the Middle East in schools. And that agreement says we will work together to combat all forms of anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism and the delegitimization of the state of Israel. I will tell you that people in the State Department said, there is no way they're going to sign that. In fact, nobody's going to sign that. And you know what? They ended up signing it. Now, look, I'm not naive. Frank is I don't disagree with a thing Frank said. I mean, this is tough. By the way, Bahrain is a much easier crowd than your average campus is, for sure. But you know, again, at what point do you throw in the towel on a term that is so central to who we are? That is the Jewish people as a people. And if we don't somehow wrap ourselves around that concept, and look, even in our lexicon tonight, how many times did we talk about hate crimes on the Jewish religion as opposed to any other religion, right? Even in the way we talk about it, the way the FBI categorizes it, we constantly come back to Judaism being a religion. Well, yes, it is. It's also that, but you know, the state of Israel doesn't exist based on our status as a religion. I mean, religions don't get countries, people get countries, and it's based on Zionism and our entity, our status as an ethnic entity. And so, again, very tough problem. Frank, I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but just it's a deep point and one that really requires struggle.
Thank you, Elan. Michael, you wanted to add something there?
Certainly. Just to follow up on what Frank was saying, and I understand from a communications perspective why not pushing certain buttons is appropriate. I do. I absolutely understand that in trying to find that common ground, the strategy is putting forward. But I have to tell you, in Canada, this is becoming a political problem on the front lines. And we're seeing that, you know, this anti-Zionism is nothing but very thinly veiled anti-Semitism each and every time. And we've got groups now that are attacking on this front again and again and again. It's ground that I really, really worry about ceding to the other side because they are using that, manipulating it as cover to be able to attack our students. But it's not just on campus, it's in the workplace now. It's in boards of education, it's in union halls. And it's always this same thing. No, we're not, you know, we're not anti-Semitic. We just don't like Zionists. So I get, you know, I understand, Frank, the communication strategy there, but I worry about the implications of, again, leaving that ground open to be filled, because I don't think we're going to like what it's going to be filled with.
So the people who are listening have to make a decision. And I think it's a decision that will be made by each individual. Giving up on that word is giving up on a piece of our soul. It's giving up on a piece of how we were all raised. But if you seek to defend it, your audience will hear nothing of what you say next. And as someone who has made a living on communication, I need to be heard. If I use that word, I won't be heard. That's why I don't use that terminology. I need to be heard.
And I just to follow up on what you're saying, Frank, I think in the context of individuals, especially students on campus that may find themselves at risk or in a situation that could get hot and out of control, I do absolutely understand what you're saying. I think as Jewish community organizations like Hasbara and Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center and Hillel, to be ceding that ground is something very different, because we have the tools and we have the ability to be able to continue pushing and reaching out. Listen, I'm not suggesting that we should be using, Zionism as a battering ram, but I really do, certainly as a community, to just kind of shift from that word, especially as an organized community. It concerns me, because I got to tell you, I am a proud Zionist, and I want to wear that on my sleeve, on my lapel, wherever I can. And those that are going to seek to vilify and demonize me or my community, again, I on an individual basis, I totally understand keeping our kids safe and being able to give them tools before we send them out to necessarily get into something more heated. But as a community, I think we have to be careful about backing off that language.
And
I think we're going to,
the tragedy behind that, hold on. And the tragedy behind that is that you will fail. You will feel so good. Right now, what you just said, I'm sure we got 122 people watching, and probably 100 of them stood up and applauded you. I watched Daniel do it. I watched him applaud you on this screen. And I know from the research that we have done, not from my heart, not from my history, Michael, but from hardcore research, which we Jews are supposed to advocate. We're supposed to be people of the book. We're supposed to tell facts, not emotion. Your statement was wonderful. It was emotional, and I wanted to stand up and applaud. And I know that if that's what you teach your students, if that's what you teach people to say, I know that they will fail, because they will hear nothing after they hear the word Zionist. And I think that is so unfair. Again, Michael, in my heart, I know you're right. But my research in Canada tells me that you're wrong.
I think there's a middle ground. I think there's a middle ground, right? The middle ground is in between what both of you guys are saying, right? Frank, you're right. Michael, you're right. Daniel, you're right. You're all right. But the reality is that we have two mountains, especially when we talk about campus, right? And we need to find a way of carving the middle, going down the center path. And we have students every day that we are supporting, talking about who they are as people, who they are as individuals, what is important to them, where they come from mentally, emotionally, physically, culturally, religiously. And we need to find a way to bring those two mountains together. Frank, from a communications perspective, 100%, you're right. But to Michael's point, we can't cede that ground, so we need to figure out a way of getting down the middle, and that's what we're trying to do every day.
So the question,
and Frank, let me just one last
Mike.
point.
All right, really quick there.
Sorry. Yeah, Frank. Again, as I said to you, we have to keep our students safe, and we've got Jay and Daniel doing that work on campus every single day. Okay. What I'm saying to you is that ceding the ground as a community, not being able to build that confidence in our students to be Zionists, and they can be proud. I'm not suggesting they take that to the streets. I'm suggesting that ceding the ground and saying we're not going to identify as Zionists anymore, I think is a detriment to the community.
So the question I have here, Frank, is and to your point, it's become a word that is a dangerous one to use, because no one will hear you once you use it. What is the word that should be used? How could a student who's fighting this rhetoric be pro-Israel but without saying Zionist?
A rose by any other name.
Okay, what does that mean?
I don't know. I got Shakespearean.
I was lost too. But okay, we'll move on, guys. So let's talk about campus since we're on the topic. And the question here is from an audience member: what is being done about the uptick in anti-Semitism and BDS in universities and colleges across North America, especially in medical and dental schools? What can we do as a community to help eradicate this problem? Are there legal avenues that can be pursued? I'll turn it to Daniel because I know he has lots to say on this topic.
Thank you, Max. And that's an excellent question. And you know what I would really say, the first thing that we can do is support our students. Support our students in the sense that they know we are behind them. And it kind of speaks to what we were just talking about right now. In my view, and from what I'm seeing, there is a movement right now, especially amongst students, especially amongst young people, where they are so proud to be Zionist right now. And if anything, the recent conflict in May has galvanized this new generation, these Rudy Rockmans, these Ben Freemans, these Chen Mazigs, this generation of activists who are very proud to be Zionist, and they're owning and identifying as Zionist. And while I agree wholeheartedly that to be able to say that right away off the bat, 100% you're going to turn people off. But if we are having conversations with individuals, and if we are able to maybe perhaps not use that word right away, but then bring it eventually, there is something I think that you're able to make real change. And in terms of supporting students, it's so easy for them, again, to not respond, to not identify as Jewish or Zionist. You can go on campus, never wear a Magen David, never wear a kippah, never say anything about Israel, and you'll be there the whole 4 years and you won't have a problem once, right? But why do we have to do that? We should be able to be Jewish, be Zionist, be who we are as people, and that's never to negate, or at the expense of anyone else. And if we're able to support our students where we let them know we are here with you, we encourage you to open up, to educate others, to speak up to others, to engage others about these issues, and to let them know, don't back down from this. You need to stand up. You need to speak up. Every single Jew has a unique responsibility right now. No one else is standing up for us, and we do have some allies, but we can't afford, I think, right now to be silent. And when our students are being supported, when our students know that they have the support of their friends, their peers, their parents, etc., that makes a monumental difference to them, and it truly emboldens them and invigorates them to do what's right. And I can share so many stories of students who have spoken up in the classroom when professors have talked about Jews not being indigenous to Israel or Jews not having a relationship, and truly just from having that support, it's something that makes such a long way. And in terms of the legal avenues that can be pursued, it's a case-by-case basis. And that's why, again, any students who are on the call right now, speak up, reach out to Hasbara, reach out to Hillel, reach out to the administration. And again, don't look at it from a malicious standpoint or from a negative standpoint. There's a lot of times when a professor is saying something, a student group is saying something, and it might not be malicious, it might not be anti-Semitic in intent, right? But to not speak up, to not have that conversation, to not engage, that's where you're doing a disservice to yourself and to the community. And truly, that's, I think, where it all begins.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, so I'm going to move over to Michael here.
Good moderating, Mike.
So let me just add, it was a very difficult time for students this spring, especially in the heat of the conflict between Israel and the terror group Hamas. We were getting phone calls on an hourly basis in some cases, because people felt completely out of their depth. All of a sudden, social media lit up. Their chats were filled with material they had never seen before. It was intimidating. And what I would say is reach out to these organizations that can help. There's a lot of them that do really great work on campus, but don't feel you're alone. Don't feel you're alone. I can tell you that we had situations at U of T, at Western, at Kingston, involving med and dental schools, I think, that we actually sat down with students because they had opened up, they'd gotten some hot water, and we actually helped them strategize, walked them through it, gave advice, because you know what? Our students don't sign up for that. Our students don't sign up. I just know a bunch of kids that have gone off to McGill for first year, And they, they weren't thinking about what a great time are they going to have at Frosh Week. They're thinking about, are they prepared to be able to be on campus facing, potential challenges that might come up on Israel Apartheid Week or, BDS events, etc. It's tragic. I have to tell you, it's tragic. It's heartbreaking. It wasn't my experience at university at 18 years old. But we're going to be there for them. We're going to be there for them. We'll be there to support them. And it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy either. But I think as a community, we need to continue giving them that support. I'm going to do one quick plug here, and I feel good about it because the other two groups involved are involved, and that is on September 30th at 7:30 p.m. Stand With Us, B'nai B'rith Canada, Hasbara, Hillel, and Sija are hosting Rudy Rockman in defense of Israel. We're all working together on this one event and panel, which we think will be great for students and everyone. So again, I feel comfortable doing it because the other groups here are all involved and are co-partnering with Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And as a student, as I said, I this event was born out of me feeling like I didn't know where to turn. So you know what, a really important part of that answer, and I'll go to you, Jay, in a sec, is that really you don't have to, and Frank and Elan, but you don't have to know everything. Turn to the organizations that can help you. That's crucial. Okay, Jay, really quick.
5 quick things. I'll give you one sentence on each, what we can do about campus. 1, we need to talk about anti-Semitism more than we need to talk about Israel right now. This is all about anti-Semitism. 2, we need to keep administrations on side. Number 3, we need to take Jews on missions, take non-Jews, on missions to Israel to let them learn about Israel firsthand. 4, we need to get our friends, moderates elected to student government positions. We can't do anything from the sidelines. And number 5, when it comes to faculty, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Every single time a student has a problem with a faculty member who is doing something that is anti-Semitic, that is anti-Israel, that is anti-Zionism, they need to complain, they need to put it in writing, they need to let the university administration know so that they can take action. And I'll give you a 5.5 for one more half point. We need to listen to what the next generation of Jews are saying on campus. It's great that we have, as I forget who said it, Frank, I think it was you that said it, we've got, 5 or 6 middle-aged men here, some of who have less hair than others. Sorry, but Elan, you're with me on this one. We need to listen to what the next generation of young Jews are saying, because I'll tell you something, that group of students are far more progressive, far more nuanced, far more left than any of us on this call. And we need to listen to that, and we need to be prepared to work with them on that.
And that's another point. One of the things that scared me the most was that there were peers of mine who are Jewish and do love Israel, but they're left. They are progressive, and they do need they have questions that need to be answered. Frank, you wanted to comment on this? Just unmute yourself. Frank, you're just muted there. All right, there you go.
Okay, I hope you can see it, because everything I say to you in this program is not based on my point of view. It's based on research. And you may have to remove the pictures on the side. What I have to do is look at where people stand on Israel, Jewish homeland, Jewish nation, and Zionist. Jay, we should listen to our students. And our students are saying that they're not, that they don't want to communicate about Zionist or Zionism. That when you got 15% of the population being favorable towards Zionist, compared to 36% Jewish nation, 36% Jewish homeland, and 43% Israel, which, by the way, stinks. It's less than half. But at least talking about Israel is 3 times more credible, more favorable. What I would ask of you to add to this part is to use research, is to use the truth, not how we want it to be, but how it actually is. Start with how it is and then seek to change it, as opposed to setting our kids off, telling them, you got to say this word, and watching them get cut down in classrooms, get cut down in libraries, get cut down on their way to class. Let's be smart about it, not emotional, and use the research. Michael, do you have research that shows the language that you're advocating? Have you done the polling in the last 12 months and you can prove it?
Frank, I already said to you that I'm not suggesting we send them in there with
You have
language that's
research.
going to cause them under threat. I said that. What I'm saying to you is I don't think that we should write off terminology and write off things that are as important as
Michael,
Zionism is to the identity of the Jewish people.
I ask everyone here, I assume Daniel does because it's actually your job. Michael, do you have actual language research that you're using to make the recommendations for your students?
All right.
We are doing education in classrooms that has been built over a number of years in terms of educating on Holocaust, educating on anti-Semitism awareness, and again, we work with school boards, we work with other organizations in doing that. I don't have the data that you have there. Is that population as a whole, those figures, or is that Jewish? That's broad population, right?
That is broad population. We have it Jewish as well. But if you don't have the research, this is actually this is not a criticism of you. I want to say that again. This is not a criticism of you. It's simply saying to everyone who's on this call, let's put the same kind of precision into communication that we do to everything else in our lives. Why should we take it for granted that we know in this when it matters so much to us?
All right, so we'll turn to Elan for last point.
Yeah, so I could not possibly agree more with what Jay said in response to the campus dynamics. You know, there are two kinds of BDS. There's real economic BDS. You know, let's say what Ben & Jerry's has done and other such companies. And there are absolutely legal responses to that. Many US states, for example, have laws against that kind of BDS, and there are potential sanctions. Campus BDS is something completely different. It's very important to remember there's economic BDS and then there's campus BDS. Campus BDS isn't really about boycotting Israel. What it's about is poisoning the view of students, the next generation of leaders, of corporations and civic society and governments about Israel. And so if you have these resolutions, these BDS resolutions that you know spread all of these blood libels about Israel and then you know demand some kind of call to action, namely a boycott, even if it doesn't happen, they've won. They've won. You don't have to have a boycott for them to win. And so what Jay said is so right on the money, because these all-night vigils that students do when a BDS resolution comes before a student senate or a student government council is often too late. You can cry and weep and talk about your experiences, but if the people who were elected are anti-Israel, you're not going to persuade them, and that resolution is going to pass. But if you elect leaders, and by the way, it doesn't take much to increase voter turnout on a campus. It doesn't take much to improve, as Frank says, communications, good political, smart communications in a student election, because everyone's an amateur. So all you need to do is be a little bit better, and you're going to knock these elections out of the park. When you have good people elected, you win. Let me give you an example from today. From today, it's shocking that on the week that we're commemorating, celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords, there's a vile BDS resolution in the city of Burlington, Vermont. By the way, that's real BDS, real economic BDS, in the city council of Burlington, Vermont. What happened? The mayor of Vermont said, no way, if this thing passes, I'm vetoing it. This is anti-Israel. I don't support BDS. And so that resolution was pulled. They didn't even vote on it because the mayor said, I will never allow this to pass as long as I'm in the chair. That's what happens when you have elected leaders who are friendly. So bravo, Jay, you hit the nail on the head.
All right, so we'll move on to our next question. Thank you, guys. This is an interesting one. How do we address anti-Semitic narratives that get masked as freedom of speech? And this is from another audience member. There are people who post things that they don't think are anti-Semitic that are inherently are. How do we respond to this?
Can I just correct a misconception in the question? Anti-Semitism isn't masked as freedom of speech. Anti-Semitism is freedom of speech. I mean, unless it rises to the level of, now I'm talking in America now, unless it rises to the level of conspiracy or incitement, the fact that, it's not illegal to hate Jews, and it's not illegal to say very ugly, vile things about the Jews. There's a Supreme Court case in the United States that the Nazis could march in Skokie, Illinois, and they're certainly anti-Semitic. But here's the thing I would say about it. Just because speech is protected, that just means it's protected from censorship or punishment. It's not protected from condemnation. And what you'll very often see, especially these far left anti-Semitic groups, by the way, some of them are Jewish. Let me be very clear, JVP.
Yes, they are.
JVP is an anti-Semitic group, period. There's no question about it. And when these groups oppose adoption of the standard definition of anti-Semitism, called the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, or if any time you want to call them out for being anti-Semitic, they'll yell about freedom of speech, as though freedom of speech means only they have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom of speech to condemn them. That's a very key point here. You've got to call out anti-Semitism and condemn it as anti-Semitism, because freedom of speech doesn't protect them from condemnation. It protects them from
So just twisting a little, what about anti-Semitic narrative that gets masked under anti-Zionism or anti-Israel speech?
Well, yeah, that's why, it's so important to be clear. And that's why in my opening remarks, I said, let's understand this. Hatred of the Jewish state is hatred of the Jewish people. We have to be very clear about that and not get kind of lost in this fog of, well, once there's a country involved, well, it's something else. It's not something else. I mean, if you hate the Jewish collective, you hate the Jewish people. And in fact, one of the great powers of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition, which many of our groups here represented on this call have been great proponents of. More and more countries are adopting the IRA definition, including some Muslim majority countries are adopting the IRA definition, is that in its examples, it makes clear that in addition to, blaming Jews for pandemics and accusing Jews of running the banks and all of these things, also comparing Israel to Nazi Germany is an example of anti-Semitism. Denying the Jewish people the right of self-determination, for example, by claiming that the state of Israel and its creation is a racist endeavor. That's given as an example of anti-Semitism. Subjecting Israel to a double standard to which no other democracy is subjected, an example of anti-Semitism. And so these definitions are very, very important, and it gives us a common basis to operate. And that's very, very important to be able to say, listen, because what Frank said earlier is right. Not every kid is intending to be anti-Semitic, and not every kid is an enemy. And if you say, look, are you aware that what you just said is an example of anti-Semitism, and here's why, 1 out of 5 kids are going to say, you know what, I didn't realize that. I didn't think of it that way. And we'll be educated and we'll be edified on the subject. Now, again, the enemy, the enemy is the enemy, but we're not trying to persuade them. I mean, we're trying to go after the middle, the kids who don't know any better and are being sucked into, seduced, lured into the deep, dark crevices of anti-Semitism, and they don't know that that's happening. And that's the key. I'll tell you a story from.
Sorry, I might have.
Son of, let me just tell you a story. A kid at NYU who was a freshman at NYU. He happens to be the son of Jason Greenblatt, who worked with me in the administration. And he said to me when he was a freshman at NYU, I asked him how it's going. He said, well, I went to a BDS rally. I said, oh, tell me. What'd you think? He said, I wanted to see what the other side was saying. And I said, yeah, and? He said, let me tell you, and this is chilling, he said, if I didn't have my background, I would be with them. I would have signed on with them if I didn't have my background. These people know what they're doing. So we have to be very smart, and we've got to know what we're doing. We've got
By the way, Elan, you know why they know what they're doing? They've put in over $2 million in research. They know what visuals work. They know what words work. They teach their young people how to communicate this.
Great.
They don't do it from the gut. They do it in a professional way.
Agreed.
So
Michael, I'll let you finish off this one. Michael, did you want to add to this?
Oh, no, sorry. No, I'm good.
All right. So we're going to continue on this topic of educating others. And the question is, how do we approach public school boards about including education on Israel and anti-Semitism? Society is well aware of hate towards other minorities, including African Americans, Asians, and Muslims. How do we bring anti-Semitism or Jew hate into the conversation and educational systems? Michael, please go ahead.
This is work. We got a grant from the provincial government of Ontario earlier in the summer, and we actually were working both with educators and with students in terms of raising awareness on anti-Semitism, and really we've called it unpacking inequity and talking about, again, shared safe space. A lot of time there, you know, we saw situations in school boards over the last number of months. I can think of 2 or 3 where we had equity officers and other people in positions of authority really making the safe very unspace for Jewish teachers, Jewish faculty, Jewish students. And that's the work we've been doing. So very much engaging directly. It follows up on the work that we do in Holocaust education, which we do across the country with public school boards every single day. But I think there's an important space here for, again, the transition from Holocaust education, because we know how important those lessons are generally. When we teach the Holocaust, we teach about anti-Semitism, but we also, it pivots to genocide education and the broader battle against hate and intolerance. We use it, you know, as a model and project it forward. I think in the anti-Semitism education, and to Frank's point, it's evolving. This is evolving areas. The fact that we've got boards of education, again, corporations, law firms, tribunals, others wanting to sit down and hear and talk and engage in the discussion, we're finding more and more space as they have programming for, again, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous, LGBTQ. The Jewish community is getting an opportunity to sit down and be able to have some of those difficult conversations. But it's a work in progress, to be sure. And, you know, I think Frank raises a number of really good points. We need to continue working to try to find language that connects. But I also think we need to, again, you know, a lot of these things have never been discussed. I'll give you an example. We had a situation with a school board out west of Toronto, smaller school board, and they put out a statement right in May, in the middle of, again, the conflict, which basically talked about Palestinian families, Palestinian students. We know this must be a very hard time for you. You must be grieving. And not a word about Jewish families or students that might have family in Israel, that might be, again, in Sderot or somewhere around there. Elan, I've been to Sderot. I've seen the basketball court with the bulletproof roof on top of it. I mean, it's tragic, but not a word. When we engaged with that school board, when we sat them down and told them, because a parent had notified us, when we told them the implication, they understood. And I have to tell you, we're going back into that school board next month. They came to us and said, we particularly want you to come and educate us about the new anti-Semitism. So there's teachable moments here. There's teachable moments, but I think we have to take those opportunities and be able to sit down, and connect, because we've got to be developing voices and allies outside of our own community. I think that's absolutely key, whether it's on campus, whether it's, again, at a community level. We've got to be reaching more broadly out to bring other people in that, again, will stand up the next time we're under attack, because we know that we were very much devoid of that support this last time.
Thank you, Michael. All right, if no one else wants to comment on that one, we'll go to a more American-related question, and that is, how has the Biden presidency affected the US and Israel relations? And I believe, Frank, you'd like to comment on this one?
Well, I also want to hear what Elan has, because he was right there with the previous president. And while a lot of people on this call, and I would call myself one of them, had major issues with him, when it came to Israel, it was just absolutely incredible. The challenge now is that you have so much pressure from Democrats, from progressives on the administration. and they don't hold back. And so Biden was actually on the tarmac, and it was, I believe, Congresswoman Omar went up to him and actually started lobbying on behalf of the Palestinians. We have a political problem now, in that the messaging and the information to younger voters, to female voters, and to voters center left within the Democrats is, they, among half of these people now, they're actually more pro-Palestinian rather than pro-Israeli. And I never expected that to be. And I was expecting Joe Biden to harken back to the points of view that he had when he was a senator, or even early on in his vice presidency. And I'm not convinced that he will do that. I'm actually very nervous that he will buckle, that he will use this as a way to distinguish himself from Donald Trump. And certainly the way he handled Afghanistan is not good news for us in terms of him being willing to stand up against left of center pressure among the Democrats. But Elan, you were behind the scenes, so you know the way things were, and you know how the situation operates.
Yeah.
Getting outside just the pressure groups, what do you expect from the White House?
Yeah, it's a new sheriff in town, that's for sure. It's very different. Look, it's a mixed bag. I'll tell you, I believe in giving credit where credit is due, and I just publicly praised President Biden for leading the U.S. to boycott Durban 4, an obscene commemoration by the UN of one of the most appalling displays of overt anti-Semitism we've seen in many, many decades. We are coming upon the 20th anniversary of the Durban Conference. And now, in fairness, previous administrations have boycotted previous iterations of Durban commemorations. But you know what? President Biden did the right thing. And he said, you know what? US won't participate. It's great. He picked for my successor, really somebody outstanding. I mean, Deborah Lipstadt is a very, very strong choice. Do we agree on everything, she and I? No, but she's a friend and I've worked with her, and she's a ferocious enemy of anti-Semitism. And by the way, she calls it out on the left too. And I said, boy, it'll be interesting to see whom they pick. Are they going to pick someone mousy that they'll control? Well, they didn't pick someone mousy. She is ferocious. And so that's a very good pick. On the other hand, look, this is an administration beholden to the left. Like Frank said, there is an enormous pressure coming from the left that not only the White House feels, but my goodness, you know, look, I mean, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Hoyer, Steny Hoyer is an incredible friend of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. They won't bring up for a vote the IRA definition of anti-Semitism because the left will go berserk. And even though they have the votes, but they don't want to split their caucus. And so this is what we're dealing with. And I'll tell you, it pains me deeply because, you know, I'll never forget in my 2 years as special envoy, one of the most disturbing meetings I had during the entire 2 years was with a UK Labour MP who walked out of the Labour Party, courageous, walked out of the Labour Party because this MP said, I won't sit at the same table with anti-Semites. This was before the election. And this MP said to me, and my hair stood on it, the MP said, this disaster that we have in England all started on the campuses, but we did nothing because, well, they were just students. And then it moved into the Labour Party. And we did nothing because it was just the far left fringe. And then they won and we lost, and I no longer have a political party. And I got to tell you, this is a clarion call to all of us that, you know what? Cancers don't go away when they're not contained, they grow. That's the way it always has been. And here too, we have got to contain this. We've got to put these people in their place. We've got to be forceful. That we would hear overt anti-Semitic statements in the halls of Congress, the way we're hearing it today, it would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. And let me tell you why we're hearing it. It's not their ethnicity. People want to talk about their ethnic background. It's not their ethnic background. It's their age. They were in college not too long ago. And what they're saying in Congress is orthodoxy on college campuses. They're not saying anything new. They're just repeating what is being said in class and by student groups all over universities in the United States, in Canada, and in Europe. By the way, I met with student leaders in Germany and in France and in the UK. It's the same thing. And so there are real costs to this, which is why this particular assembly of students is so deeply important. Our enemies are playing the long game. They're investing a lot in you, in students, because they know that it's too late for people already leading our countries. You know, you're not going to convince Stephen Harper that Israel is bad. And by the way, and I should say, Prime Minister Trudeau made a terrific statement against BDS. But you know what? Students, young, impressionable, you can go after students, and if you poison them on Israel, you're going to win in 5 or 10 or 20 years, but eventually you're going to win. Israel's going to have no more friends left. That's the long game they're playing. That's why this is so important, and that's why all of you dental students are so absolutely critical to this fight.
Thank you, Elan. So on that note, we're going to finish off with, you know, we have an increase in anti-Semitism, specifically on campuses, and you just spoke about why it's so dangerous. BDS is a systemic, research-based manifesto, mission. What can we do, and what would you like to see done in a more controlled and widespread manner to combat it? And one person actually left a comment during the presentations. You all talked about education, but studies show that the more educated people are, the greater their tendency towards anti-Semitism. How do you combat this? So what would you like to see happen in the near future on campuses in a widespread fashion?
Well, there's a lot of things, but first of all, good people have to come together and lead. We've got to be a lot more proactive. We tend to be very reactive. Okay, they're going to have, hate week against Israel. We're going to do something to counter that. We're always countering. Well, that's good. You've got to play defense because, you can't win a war playing, if you don't play defense. But on the other hand, if you don't play offense, you don't win anything. And so we also have to be proactive. And that doesn't just mean on Jew hatred. It also means to shout from the rooftops who we are as a people, what our history has been. My goodness, I mean, the Jewish people brought so much to the world. Our countries, the US, Canada, wouldn't be what they are today without Jewish principles and Jewish influence and Jewish ideology that is woven into the national narratives and DNAs of our country. And so we've got to also be proactive in driving a philo-Semitic narrative about what the Jewish people are and what we've brought to the world and what the state of Israel is and brought to the world. So that's one thing. Another thing is we have to be a lot smarter in how we communicate, and also in being much better leaders, in turning out leaders, in being much more engaged in campus. Voter turnout, voter turnout in a student government election is something like 9% on a good day. And that is just, I mean, you know what? You rally good people to turn out, to elect students who are pro-Western, pro-America, pro-Canadian, pro-American, and also who care about campus issues instead of gallivanting across the world on all of these anti-Western issues, including being anti-Israel. You're going to change the dynamic dramatically.
Thank you, Elan. So sorry, we only have a few minutes, so I'm just going to let Michael get in there. Go ahead, Michael.
Sure, and I want to add another thought to the campus scenario, and it's true generally as well, and that is allyship. When we're isolated as a community, it becomes an ever harder hill to climb. When we can reach out, and I'm thinking of some of the great programs, and I'm sure Hasbara and Hillel are doing it too, but I'm thinking of CJFAC's fellowship program. I'm thinking of my former intern, Hilly Adler, who put together Bridging the Gap up at York University. When we can have non-Jews as strong advocates for the state of Israel, coming together and giving and adding to our voices, it carries a lot of weight. And that's work that we're doing at Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, reaching out and again, bringing people in from other communities, having the conversations. We had an Indigenous Jewish dialogue with an organization called Outside Looking In, where we brought together Indigenous youth and Jewish youth in a small setting to talk and understand and gain a perspective on the challenges that they each face. When we can do those sorts of things, whether it be on campus or the community at large, I think it bodes well for us in the long term, because it's no fun being isolated.
Thank you. Frank, did you want to comment on this in the sense of a more a communications perspective?
Yes, and Max, the fact that more than 100 people are still listening in is a tribute to both your vision in putting this together and the panelists. For me, it's 1 a.m. So if you got any people watching from Europe, go to sleep. I put this up for you because this is once again a surprise. And I probably would not have said this, would not have shown this if this had been 10 years ago. But the way that you get empathy for the Jewish community is to show empathy for other communities. The way that you get empathy for Israel is to show empathy for the Palestinians, and this is how to do it. This is differentiating the difference between the people and their leadership, and the leadership that's damning them. The idea that you blame the Hamas leadership rather than the people of Gaza, I think is very important. If this is a cancer, and Elan, I think it is, all of us would find the best cancer doctor possible. There isn't one of us who would ask people on the street or trust our gut if we knew that we had cancer. I think the Jewish community has to do exactly the same and make a commitment to the most effective, the most impactful language. And by the way, Max, your generation doesn't even focus on words. You guys don't read newspapers. It's all Instagram for you.
I don't even know how to read.
It's all, we can see that. You presented that earlier when you were doing the introduction. So
Exactly, yeah.
But we'll talk about that. I look at social media and I see how incredibly impactful and effective the critics of Israel are, and how our response is abysmal. Social media matters. Facebook matters. Instagram, YouTube. This is where the generation, the 35 and under, are getting their information now, and we're doing an awful job. So let us all commit. The 100 people that are listening right now, all of us on the Zoom, let's commit to do what works. Let's commit to do what will have an impact. Let's commit to not just to saying, let's make a difference, let's actually do it.
Thank you. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. This has been tremendous. Everything is recorded here. I will get the content shared by some of the panelists to then share with you, the audience. And I don't want to take any more of the panelists' time. I hope this is not the last event. Michael, there was a website you guys have. What is anti-Semitism? Is that right? What is it called?
It's antisemitism.ca.
It's antisemitism.ca. Frank said that social media matters. And this website, it's antisemitism.ca, has short, effective statements, explanations of why well and commonly used anti-Israel, anti-Semitic statements that are posted on social media are wrong. And it's great. It's wonderful. I encourage you to check it out. Now I will turn it over to Carol, who will sign off for the night.
Thank you. Max, great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's
Well
our
done,
pleasure
Max.
to have all of you.
Thank you, Max. Kol hakavod.
Max.
Wow, I'm blown away by these presentations and the debate that they provoked, and the wonderful questions we got from our audience. At this time, I'd like to thank you everyone for tuning into our Zoom presentation. I want to thank all the speakers once again for their very valuable comments and recommendations. It has been our pleasure and duty to offer this presentation to you, our audience. It is indeed our obligation to unify as a community to fight anti-Semitism in every form. Thanks once again to our valuable sponsors, Danielle Martin from Scotiabank Wealth Management, FSWC, and UJA. Thank you to Laurel Lunetsky Fleischer, Jackie Levitan, our Alpha Omega Executive Secretary and her team, and Alpha Omega Toronto Alumni Chapter, and UJA for facilitating this evening. Good night, and thank you again for joining us. Thanks again to the panelists.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Here.
Bye-bye.
Fatima Tova.
Thank you.